I never imagined that moving into a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona, would turn into a technological hostage situation. But when the HOA president demanded access to my personal Wi-Fi network, things escalated faster than a summer monsoon rolling across the desert. My name is Carson, and I'm a software engineer who works remotely for a tech company based in San Francisco. I bought my house in the Sonoran Heights community 6 months ago, attracted by the modern architecture, the mountain views, and what I thought would be a peaceful environment to focus on my coding projects. The neighborhood had that pristine Arizona aesthetic, with manicured desert landscaping, beige stucco homes with terracotta roofs, and streets named after various cacti species. I lived on Saguaro Drive, in a 3-bedroom house that I had set up as my perfect remote work headquarters. The trouble started on a Monday morning in late March. I was sitting at my home office desk, working through a complex back-end integration problem when my doorbell rang. I saved my work and walked to the front door, expecting maybe a package delivery or a neighbor asking to borrow something. Instead, I found myself face to face with Brenda Patterson, the president of the Sonoran Heights Homeowners Association. Brenda was a woman in her early 50s with shoulder-length blonde hair that was always perfectly styled, despite the dry Arizona heat. She wore oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head like a headband, a crisp white blouse, and beige capri pants. Her expression carried that particular brand of entitlement that comes from having too much time and too much authority over other people's lives. Carson, she asked, even though she obviously knew who I was. That's me. What can I do for you, Brenda? I need to discuss an urgent matter with you, she said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping past me into my foyer. It concerns community resources and your responsibility as a homeowner here. I closed the door, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. In my 6 months here, I had kept my lawn perfect, painted nothing without approval, and followed every ridiculous rule in the HOA handbook. I couldn't imagine what I had done wrong. "What's this about?" I asked. Brenda turned to face me, crossing her arms. "I've been trying to work from home this past week, and the internet connection at my house has been absolutely abysmal. I can barely load my emails, let alone join a video conference. I called the internet provider, and they said there's some kind of infrastructure issue in my area that won't be fixed for at least a week, maybe longer." I nodded, unsure where this was going. That's frustrating. "Have you tried using your phone as a hotspot?" Her eyes narrowed. "My data plan is limited, Derek. I can't run my entire business operations off my cell phone, which brings me to why I'm here. I need access to your Wi-Fi network." I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your Wi-Fi," she repeated, as if explaining something to a child. "I need the password. My house is only 3 doors down, so if you have a strong router, I should be able to pick up the signal from my home office. This is a community emergency, and as HOA president, I'm authorized to requisition resources when necessary." I actually laughed, thinking she must be joking. "Brenda, I don't think the HOA bylaws cover requisitioning someone's private internet connection. That's not how any of this works." Her face hardened. "I'm not asking, Derek. I'm informing you of your obligation. The HOA has authority over community welfare, and right now, I need internet access to fulfill my duties. I have HOA business to conduct, permits to review, violation notices to send out. Without internet, I can't do my job." "Then go to a coffee shop," I suggested. "There's a Starbucks 10 minutes away. They have free Wi-Fi." "I am not going to conduct sensitive HOA business in a public location," she snapped. "That would be completely inappropriate." No, you're going to give me your Wi-Fi password and I'll work from home as planned. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. Brenda, I work from home too. I'm a software engineer, and I'm constantly transferring large files, running virtual machines, and connecting to secure company networks. My internet connection is already stretched. I can't have someone else using my bandwidth. Plus, my company has strict security policies. I'm not allowed to share my network with unauthorized users. I'll only use it for basic tasks, she insisted. Email, some document editing, maybe a few video calls. It won't impact you at all. The answer is no, I said firmly. It's my private network, paid for with my money, and I'm not sharing it. I'm sorry you're having internet problems, but that's not my responsibility. Brenda's face flushed red. You're making a very big mistake, Mr. Carson. As HOA president, I have considerable authority over your life here. I can make things very difficult for you if you don't cooperate. Is that a threat? I asked, feeling my own anger rising. It's a reality check, she said coldly. Think very carefully about your decision. I'll be back tomorrow for that password. She stormed out, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Did the HOA president really just try to commandeer my internet connection? And did she actually threaten me when I refused? I returned to my office, but I couldn't focus on my work. Something about the interaction bothered me beyond the immediate absurdity. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer and spent the next hour reading through every section. Nowhere in the document was there any provision for requisitioning homeowner resources, internet access, or otherwise. The HOA had authority over external property maintenance, architectural changes, and community space usage, but nothing that would give Brenda the right to demand access to my private network. That evening, I called my neighbor, Phil Rodriguez, who lived next door. Phil was a retired accountant who had been in the neighborhood for 5 years and seemed to have a good read on the HOA politics. Hey Phil, it's Derek. You got a minute? Sure, what's up? Phil's voice was friendly and relaxed. Brenda Patterson came by today and demanded my Wi-Fi password. Said her internet is out and she needs to work from home. Have you ever heard of anything like this? Phil let out a long whistle. Demanded it. That's a new one, even for Brenda. She's been HOA president for 3 years now, and she's gotten progressively more power-hungry, but I've never heard of her trying to take over someone's internet. What did you tell her? I said no, obviously. And she basically threatened me, said she could make my life difficult. Yeah, that sounds like Brenda, Phil said with a sigh. Listen, Derek, I like you, so I'm going to give you some advice. Document everything. Every interaction, every conversation, every email. Brenda has a history of retaliating against homeowners who don't fall in line with whatever she wants. Last year, she got into a dispute with the Johnsons 2 streets over about their front yard rock garden. When they refused to remove it, she started citing them for every tiny violation she could find. Mailbox 2 inches too far forward, trash cans visible from the street 5 minutes past collection time, you name it. She fined them over $2,000 before they finally moved. My stomach dropped. That's insane. Why didn't anyone stop her? The rest of the HOA board is either intimidated by her or agrees with her methods, Phil explained. And getting enough homeowners organized to vote her out is nearly impossible. Most people just keep their heads down and hope she doesn't target them. But if you've already told her no, you might be in for a rough ride. I'm not going to give in to bullying, I said. She has no right to my internet connection. You're absolutely right, Phil agreed. But being right doesn't always protect you from an HOA with too much power. Just be careful, okay? I thanked Phil and hung up, feeling even more uneasy. I spent the evening setting up a folder on my computer to document the situation. I wrote down everything that had happened that day, including the exact time of Brenda's visit and everything she had said. Phil's advice about documentation seemed wise. The next morning, I was in the middle of a video conference with my development team when my doorbell rang again. I muted my microphone and turned off my camera, then hurried to the door. Sure enough, Brenda was back, this time carrying a tablet and wearing an even more aggressive expression. "I'm working," I said through the closed door. "I can't talk right now." "Open this door, Derek," she shouted loud enough that I worried my neighbors would hear. "I need that Wi-Fi password now. I have 3 important meetings today, and my internet is still down." "I told you yesterday the answer is no," I called back. "Please leave my property. If you don't open this door right now, I'm going to start an immediate inspection of your property for HOA violations," she threatened. I opened the door, furious. "Brenda, I'm in the middle of a work meeting. I cannot give you my Wi-Fi password. It's against my company's security policy, and frankly, it's an unreasonable request. Go to a library, go to a coffee shop, go to a coworking space. There are a dozen solutions to your problem that don't involve hijacking my internet." "Those solutions cost money," she said. "Why should I have to spend money when there's a perfectly good internet connection right here in the community?" "Because it's my internet connection that I pay for," I said slowly, as if explaining to someone who didn't understand basic property rights. "It's private property. You have no right to it." Her eyes glinted dangerously. "Fine. You've made your choice. Don't say I didn't warn you." She turned and walked away, already typing something on her tablet. I closed the door and returned to my meeting, but my hands were shaking. I knew I had just made an enemy, but I also knew I was in the right. I couldn't let her bully me into submission. The retaliation started that afternoon. I received an email from the HOA with photos of my property attached. The subject line read, "Notice of violations, immediate action required." I opened the email with a sense of dread. According to Brenda's message, I was being cited for multiple violations. First, my front door mat was non-compliant with community aesthetic standards because it was black instead of the approved beige or brown tones. Second, my garage door had a small scuff mark on the bottom panel that constituted visible damage requiring immediate repair. Third, my desert landscaping included a prickly pear cactus that was apparently 6 inches taller than the maximum height allowed for front yard plantings. And fourth, my trash cans had been visible from the street at 3:15 in the afternoon on collection day, which was 15 minutes past the 2-hour grace period following pickup. Each violation carried a $50 fine, $200 total, due within 10 days. I stared at the email in disbelief. Every single one of these citations was absurdly petty. The doormat had been there when I moved in. The garage door scuff was barely visible and had been caused by the previous owner. The cactus height restriction was something I had never even heard of, buried somewhere in page 47 of the HOA handbook. And the trash can timing. I had brought them in from the curb as soon as I got back from a grocery run. 15 minutes late. This was clearly retaliation, and it was exactly what Phil had warned me about. I saved the email, added it to my documentation folder, and spent the next hour photographing everything Brenda had cited. I also walked around the neighborhood, taking pictures of other properties. It didn't take long to find similar or worse violations at a dozen other houses. One house had trash cans still at the curb a full day after collection. Another had a bright red welcome mat. Several had desert plants that were clearly over the height limit. I drafted a response email to the HOA, pointing out that these citations appeared to be selective enforcement and requesting evidence that other homeowners were being held to the same standards. I kept my tone professional but firm, and I attached photos of the comparable situations at other properties. I also noted that I was willing to address any legitimate concerns, but that I expected fair and consistent application of HOA rules. Brenda's response came within an hour. Your violations are clear and documented. Other properties are not relevant to your case. Fines must be paid within 10 days or additional penalties will apply. If you wish to appeal, you may request a hearing with the HOA board, but the fines remain due pending any appeal decision. I immediately submitted a request for a hearing. I also started researching Arizona HOA law, trying to understand what rights I had and what limits existed on HOA authority. What I learned was both encouraging and disturbing. Arizona law did provide some protections for homeowners against overly aggressive HOAs, but enforcement of those protections often required legal action. HOAs could fine homeowners, place liens on properties, and even foreclose in extreme cases. However, they were also required to follow their own bylaws, provide due process, and avoid selective enforcement. Over the next 2 days, Brenda's war of attrition continued. I received 3 more violation notices. One claimed that my house number plaque was mounted 1 inch lower than the standard height requirement. Another said my porch light fixture was not from the approved list of fixtures in the architectural guidelines, despite being the original fixture installed by the builder. The third notice cited me for excessive water usage, because my landscaping irrigation system had run for 23 minutes instead of the maximum 20 minutes allowed during drought conditions. Each notice came with a $50 fine. I was now up to $500 in fines, all received within 3 days of refusing to give Brenda my Wi-Fi password. The pattern was obvious and documented. I added each notice to my folder, along with time-stamped photos and detailed notes. On Thursday morning, 4 days after the initial confrontation, things escalated further. I walked outside to get my mail and found a bright orange sticker attached to my front door. It was an official HOA notice declaring that my property was under enhanced monitoring due to repeated violations, and that I should expect frequent inspections until compliance is achieved. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the sticker. Then I called Phil again. "Derek, this is getting out of hand," Phil said after I explained the situation. $500 in fines in 3 days. That's harassment. You need to get a lawyer involved. I have an HOA board hearing scheduled for next week, I said. I want to see if I can resolve this without lawyers first, but I'm documenting everything. Good. Make sure you record the hearing if Arizona is a one-party consent state, Phil advised. I checked, and Arizona was indeed a one-party consent state for recording, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of without informing the other parties. I made a note to bring a recording device to the hearing. That afternoon, while I was testing a new software build, my doorbell rang yet again. This time it wasn't Brenda, but a man in his 30s wearing a polo shirt with an HOA contractor logo. "Derek Carson?" he asked. "Yes. I'm here to inspect your property for code violations." HOA ordered an immediate compliance check. I stepped outside, closing my door behind me. "What exactly are you checking for?" He consulted a clipboard. "Everything. Exterior paint condition, roof condition, window condition, landscaping compliance, irrigation system compliance, outdoor equipment storage, vehicle condition. It's a full inspection." "And who ordered this inspection?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Brenda Patterson, HOA president. She said your property is a priority due to ongoing compliance issues." I watched as he spent the next 45 minutes examining every inch of my property's exterior, taking photos and making notes. He checked the spacing between my desert plants, measured the height of my prickly pear cactus, examined my roof tiles with binoculars, and even looked through my side gate at my backyard. "Find anything catastrophic?" I asked when he finished. He shrugged. "You've got some minor stuff, but honestly, your property is in better shape than most in the neighborhood. I'll submit my report to the HOA. "Let me guess," I said. "Brenda will find a way to turn your minor stuff into major violations." He gave me a knowing look. "I just do the inspections, man. What the HOA does with them is out of my hands. But between you and me, you might want to make sure everything is absolutely perfect. I've seen HOAs get pretty aggressive when they want to make a point." After he left, I felt a mix of anger and anxiety. This was spiraling out of control, and all because I wouldn't share my Wi-Fi password. I spent the evening researching HOA attorneys in the Scottsdale area, just in case things got worse. I also posted about my situation in an online forum for Arizona homeowners dealing with HOA issues. The responses were sympathetic and full of similar horror stories, but they also included some useful advice about fighting back against aggressive HOAs. Friday morning brought another development. I received an email from Brenda stating that due to my pattern of violations and lack of cooperation with HOA directives, my property access privileges were being temporarily suspended. This meant I couldn't use the community pool, fitness center, or clubhouse until I was back in good standing. I didn't particularly care about the amenities, but the principle infuriated me. I drafted another email to the HOA board, copying all the board members whose emails I could find in the community directory. I laid out the entire timeline of events, from Brenda's initial demand for my Wi-Fi password to the subsequent flood of violation notices. I pointed out that this was clear retaliation and selective enforcement, and I requested that the board intervene to stop the harassment. 2 of the board members replied. 1. A man named Richard Stevens sent a terse message saying that the HOA president had authority to enforce violations and that he saw no issue with the citations. The other, a woman named Linda Chen, sent a more sympathetic response acknowledging that the situation seemed unusual and promising to look into it. But she also cautioned that, as a single board member, her ability to override the president's decisions was limited. By Friday afternoon, 1 week after Brenda's initial visit, I had accumulated $700 in fines and was facing a stack of violation notices that would have been comical if they weren't costing me real money. The latest notice cited me for having a garden hose visible from the street, even though it was neatly coiled on a hose hanger attached to the side of my house, exactly where it was supposed to be. I was preparing for my Monday board hearing when Phil called me. "Derek, you're not going to believe this," he said, sounding amused. "Brenda just knocked on my door asking for my Wi-Fi password." I sat up straight. "What?" "Yeah, apparently she's now burned through her phone's hotspot data and still doesn't have internet at her house. She tried to tell me it was a community emergency and that I had an obligation to help. I told her no, same as you." "What did she say?" "She got mad, told me I was being selfish and unneighborly. Said she'd remember my lack of cooperation. Then she stormed off toward the Mitchell's house. I think she's going door to door." I couldn't help but laugh. "So she's been without internet this whole week, all because she insisted on working from home instead of going somewhere with public Wi-Fi. Looks like it, Phil said. And now she's pissed off at least 2 homeowners with her demands. This is going to be an interesting board meeting on Monday. That weekend, I prepared for the hearing like I was preparing for a major product launch at work. I organized all my documentation into a clear timeline, printed out the photos of comparable properties with similar or worse violations, researched the relevant sections of Arizona HOA law, and prepared a written statement outlining my case. I also set up my phone to record audio and made sure it was fully charged. I reached out to one of the attorneys I had researched, a woman named Patricia Green who specialized in HOA disputes. I explained my situation during a phone consultation, and she was immediately interested. "This is textbook retaliation," Patricia said. "And the fact that she's demanding access to your Wi-Fi is particularly absurd because it has no basis in any HOA authority. She's abusing her position as president. Document everything, record the hearing, and if they don't dismiss these fines, give me a call. We can pursue this." "What would that look like?" I asked. "We'd send a demand letter first, pointing out the illegal retaliation and requesting dismissal of all fines plus a commitment to cease the harassment. If they don't respond appropriately, we can file a lawsuit for harassment, abuse of authority, and potentially violation of your rights under Arizona's HOA statutes. You could recover your legal fees, the fines, and possibly additional damages." I felt better knowing I had options, even if it meant spending money on legal fees. The principle of the matter had become more important than the fines themselves. I wasn't going to let Brenda bully me into submission. Monday evening arrived, and I drove to the community clubhouse for the HOA board hearing. The clubhouse was a single-story building with a meeting room, a small kitchen, and an adjacent fitness center. When I arrived at 6:30, several other homeowners were already there, apparently waiting for their own hearings or just attending as observers. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Brenda was in the center, flanked by Richard Stevens on her right and Linda Chen on her left. 2 other board members, whose names I later learned were Tom Vasquez and Barbara Wright, sat at the ends of the table. About 15 homeowners sat in the audience chairs. Brenda called the meeting to order and worked through some routine business before finally calling my name. "Derek Carson, please come forward to address your violations." I walked to the front of the room, carrying my folder of documentation and my phone, which was recording in my pocket. I set the folder on a small podium that faced the board table. "Thank you for the opportunity to address these issues," I began, keeping my voice calm and professional. "I'm here to appeal 7 violation notices that I received over the past week, totaling $700 in fines. I believe these citations represent selective enforcement and retaliation." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Carson. Do you have any evidence to support it?" "Yes, I do," I said. I opened my folder and pulled out the timeline I had prepared. "On March 21st, you came to my home and demanded access to my Wi-Fi network, claiming HOA authority to requisition community resources. When I refused, you explicitly stated that you would make things difficult for me. The next day, I received my first violation notice. Over the following 6 days, I received 6 more notices, all for minor issues that had either existed since I moved in or that can be found at numerous other properties throughout the community. I distributed copies of my timeline to each board member. I've documented every interaction, including the dates and times of your visits to my home. I've also photographed comparable situations at other properties that have not been cited. This appears to be a clear pattern of retaliation for my refusal to grant you access to my private internet connection. Richard Stevens spoke up. The HOA has the right to enforce violations when they are discovered. The fact that other properties might have issues doesn't excuse your violations. I agree that violations should be enforced, I said. But they should be enforced consistently and fairly, not selectively against homeowners who refuse unreasonable demands. And speaking of unreasonable demands, I'd like to know what section of the HOA bylaws grants the president authority to requisition a homeowner's private internet connection. Linda Chen leaned forward. I'm sorry, what? Brenda, did you actually demand access to his Wi-Fi? Brenda's face reddened. I asked him, as a neighborly courtesy, if he would share his internet connection temporarily while I dealt with an outage. He refused to help with community business. You didn't ask, I corrected. You demanded, and you claimed HOA authority to do so. You also threatened me when I refused. And according to conversations I've had with other neighbors, I'm not the only homeowner you've approached with this demand. A murmur went through the audience. Phil, who was sitting in the third row, nodded in confirmation. Barbara Wright looked confused. Brenda, what's he talking about? Have you been asking homeowners for their Wi-Fi passwords? My internet was out, Brenda said defensively. I needed access to conduct HOA business. I thought the community would be willing to help. It's not unreasonable. It's completely unreasonable, Linda Chen said firmly. You can't commandeer someone's private internet connection. That's not within your authority as president. And if you've been retaliating against Derek for refusing, that's a serious problem. Tom Vasquez, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Let's look at these violation notices. Derek, can you walk us through them? I spent the next 15 minutes going through each citation, showing photos of my property and comparable photos from other properties in the neighborhood. The doormat, the garage scuff, the cactus height, the trash can timing, the house number placement, the porch light fixture, the irrigation duration, and the visible garden hose. I demonstrated that none of these were unique issues, and that several other properties had similar or worse situations without receiving citations. By the time I finished, even Richard Stevens looked uncomfortable. The evidence was overwhelming. Linda Chen spoke first. I move that we dismiss all fines against Derek Carson's property. These citations appear to be retaliatory and inconsistently enforced. We need to have a broader discussion about our enforcement policies and ensure they're being applied fairly across the community. Seconded, Tom Vasquez said immediately. Brenda looked furious. This is ridiculous. He's violated clear rules. The fact that he documented other properties doesn't change that. It shows selective enforcement, Linda insisted, which is a violation of our own bylaws and Arizona law. We vote now. All in favor of dismissing the fines. Linda, Tom, and Barbara raised their hands. Richard hesitated, then slowly raised his hand as well. Motion passes 4-1, Linda announced. Derek, your fines are dismissed. And Brenda, we need to talk after this meeting about your conduct as president. I gathered my materials and returned to my seat, feeling a wave of relief. Several homeowners gave me nods of approval or quiet congratulations as I passed. I had won this round, but I could tell from Brenda's expression that this wasn't over. The meeting continued with other business, but I barely paid attention. My heart was still racing from the confrontation. When the meeting finally adjourned, Brenda stormed out of the clubhouse without speaking to anyone. I lingered to thank Linda Chen for her support. You did the right thing by documenting everything, Linda said. I had no idea Brenda was behaving this way. Several of us on the board are going to have a serious conversation about her role going forward. This kind of abuse of authority can't continue." "I appreciate your help," I said. I was prepared to get a lawyer involved if necessary. "It shouldn't come to that," Linda assured me. "But keep your documentation just in case. Brenda can be vindictive." I drove home feeling victorious but wary. I had defended myself successfully, but I had also publicly embarrassed the HOA president. Phil's warning about Brenda's history of retaliation echoed in my mind. The next few days were quiet. I didn't receive any new violation notices, and Brenda didn't show up at my door. I returned to my normal work routine, focusing on my projects and trying to put the drama behind me. I kept checking the community forum and neighborhood social media, wondering if there would be any fallout from the hearing. On Thursday, a week and a half after the initial confrontation, I got a call from Linda Chen. "Derek, I wanted to update you on what's been happening. After your hearing, several other homeowners came forward with complaints about Brenda. Apparently, she's been using selective enforcement against anyone who crosses her for years. We've received formal complaints from 9 different homeowners. The board held an emergency meeting yesterday, and we voted to remove Brenda as president and from the board entirely." I was stunned. "Wow, I didn't expect that. Your documentation and willingness to stand up to her gave other people courage to speak up," Linda explained. "The board reviewed her enforcement actions over the past year, and the pattern was undeniable. She was targeting people based on personal grievances, not actual violations. We also discovered that she had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, claiming they were business costs. That's actually embezzlement, which is a criminal matter." "Are you going to report it?" I asked. "We're required to," Linda said. "We've already contacted our attorney, and they're advising us to file a police report. The amount is significant enough that it could be prosecuted as a felony." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and concern. I had wanted to stop Brenda's harassment, but I hadn't intended to destroy her life. Then again, if she had been stealing from the HOA, that was on her, not me. "What happens to the HOA now?" I asked. "I'm the interim president until we can hold a special election. We're also implementing new oversight procedures to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. Multiple board members will have to approve any enforcement actions, and we're establishing a clear appeals process. We're going to send a letter to all homeowners explaining what happened and apologizing for the situation." "That sounds like positive changes," I said. "It is. And Derek, thank you. You didn't have to fight this. You could have just paid the fines and moved on. But by standing up, you helped expose a real problem in our community." After hanging up, I sat in my office chair, processing the rapid turn of events. What had started as a bizarre demand for my Wi-Fi password had uncovered years of HOA corruption and abuse. I felt validated in my decision to refuse Brenda's demand and to fight back against her retaliation. The following week, the community letter went out explaining Brenda's removal and the embezzlement allegations. The neighborhood social media exploded with reactions. Some people were shocked, others said they weren't surprised, and a few defended Brenda, claiming the board had overreacted. But the majority seemed relieved that the toxic leadership was gone. I also learned through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda's internet had finally been fixed after nearly 2 full weeks without service. She had indeed spent that entire time unable to work from home effectively, just as she had feared. But instead of adapting by going to a coffee shop or library, she had stubbornly insisted on demanding access to neighbors' Wi-Fi, which had only made her situation worse and contributed to her downfall. 2 weeks after Brenda's removal, I received a knock on my door. This time it was a Scottsdale police detective, a middle-aged man named Detective Ramirez. "Mr. Carson, I'm investigating the allegations of embezzlement against Brenda Patterson related to the Sonoran Heights HOA. I understand you had conflicts with her prior to these allegations coming to light. Can you tell me about your interactions with her?" I invited him in and spent the next hour walking him through everything that had happened. I provided copies of all my documentation, including the timeline, the violation notices, the photos, and the recording of the board hearing. Detective Ramirez took extensive notes and seemed particularly interested in Brenda's attempt to claim HOA authority over my private internet connection. "This establishes a pattern of abuse of authority," he explained. "It shows that she was willing to use her position inappropriately for personal benefit. That goes to her intent regarding the embezzlement charges. If she felt entitled to commandeer your Wi-Fi for personal use under the guise of HOA business, it's consistent with using HOA funds for personal expenses under the same guise." "Is the embezzlement case solid?" I asked. "Very. The HOA attorney provided us with detailed financial records. She spent over $15,000 in HOA funds on personal expenses over the past 2 years. Spa visits, shopping trips, personal meals, even a weekend vacation to San Diego that she claimed was HOA business, but that had no connection to any actual community matters. It's clear-cut embezzlement." Detective Ramirez left with my documentation, and I felt another weight lift. The legal system was handling the situation appropriately, and I had played my part by standing up to Brenda's initial harassment. Over the next several weeks, life in Sonoran Heights gradually returned to normal. Linda Chen proved to be a fair and reasonable interim president. She conducted a review of all outstanding violation notices and dismissed dozens that appeared to be retaliatory or inconsistently enforced. She also established a violations committee with multiple members to review any citations before they were issued, preventing any single person from wielding too much power. The special election for a new permanent board was scheduled for May, and several homeowners who had been silent during Brenda's reign stepped forward to run. Phil decided to run for a board position, and I agreed to support him. The conversation in the community shifted from fear of violations to discussions about how to make the HOA actually serve the homeowners' interests. In mid-April, I received a subpoena to appear as a witness in Brenda Patterson's criminal case. The district attorney's office was moving forward with felony embezzlement charges, and they wanted me to testify about her abuse of authority and her attempt to use her position for personal benefit. I met with the assistant district attorney assigned to the case, a sharp woman named Rebecca Winters, who explained what to expect. "Your testimony will establish pattern and intent," Rebecca said. "We need to show that Brenda Patterson knowingly abused her position as HOA president for personal gain. Your experience with her demanding your Wi-Fi and then retaliating when you refused demonstrates that pattern clearly. Combined with the financial evidence, we have a strong case." "When's the trial?" I asked. "We're hoping she'll take a plea deal. The evidence is overwhelming. If she goes to trial, it would probably be sometime in July or August, but most defendants in her position accept a deal rather than risk a jury trial." Rebecca was right. In early May, I received notification that Brenda had accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to felony embezzlement and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with eligibility for work release after 9 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, along with additional fines and court costs. The total amount she owed was over $30,000 when all the penalties and interest were calculated. The news of her guilty plea and sentencing spread quickly through the neighborhood. Many homeowners expressed satisfaction that she was being held accountable, though a few still insisted that the punishment was too harsh. I didn't engage in those debates. I had done what I needed to do to protect myself, and the justice system had done its job. The special HOA election happened in mid-May, and Phil was elected to the board along with several other reform-minded candidates. Linda Chen was elected as the permanent president. The new board's first actions included revising the enforcement procedures, establishing term limits for board positions, and creating a community advisory committee to ensure homeowners had input on major decisions. By June, 3 months after Brenda's initial demand for my Wi-Fi password, Sonoran Heights had transformed from a community ruled by fear into something much healthier. Homeowners felt comfortable speaking up about concerns. Board meetings were constructive rather than confrontational. And enforcement of rules, while still present, was consistent and fair. I ran into Phil one evening while we were both checking our mail at the neighborhood mailbox cluster. "Can you believe how much has changed?" Phil asked. 3 months ago, everyone was terrified of getting on Brenda's bad side. Now we actually have a functional HOA. "It's amazing what happens when you stand up to bullies," I said. "I honestly just wanted to keep my Wi-Fi to myself. I never intended to trigger a revolution." Phil laughed. "That's how it works sometimes. One person refuses to back down and it gives everyone else courage. You know, after you turned her down and I saw what happened, I felt guilty that I hadn't stood up to her before. I knew she was abusing her power, but I kept quiet because I didn't want to be targeted. You inspired people. I just didn't want to share my internet," I said with a grin, "but I'm glad something good came out of it." We chatted for a few more minutes before heading back to our respective houses. As I walked up my driveway, I looked at my modest but well-maintained home. The black doormat was still there, the prickly pear cactus was still 6 inches too tall, and the garden hose was still visible from the street. But now these things didn't matter because the person who had weaponized trivial rules was gone. That evening, I settled into my home office and checked my Wi-Fi network. My internet speed was excellent, as always, with no unauthorized users slowing it down. I had protected my bandwidth, my company's security requirements, and my own right to control my private resources. And in the process, I had helped expose corruption and improve my entire community. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda Chen. "Derek, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. The new board is working on a formal policy document that protects homeowners from retaliation and ensures due process. We're calling it the Homeowner Bill of Rights. Would you be willing to review a draft and provide input?" I texted back, "Absolutely. Happy to help." As I returned to the coding project I had been working on, I reflected on the lessons of the past 3 months. I had learned that HOAs could wield enormous power over homeowners' lives, but that power wasn't unlimited. I had learned that documentation was crucial when dealing with any authority figure who might abuse their position. I had learned that standing up to bullies, even when it was scary and inconvenient, could lead to positive change for everyone. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most absurd confrontations could have the most significant consequences. If someone had told me 3 months ago that refusing to share my Wi-Fi password would lead to an HOA president being convicted of embezzlement and sent to prison, I would have thought they were crazy. But that's exactly what had happened. The Sonoran Heights community continued to thrive under new leadership. The changes implemented by Linda Chen and the new board became a model that other Arizona HOAs started studying. Local news even picked up the story, running a piece about how one homeowner's resistance to an unreasonable demand had exposed corruption and led to meaningful reform. I was interviewed for the news segment, and while I was initially hesitant about the publicity, I decided it might help other homeowners dealing with similar situations. During the interview, the reporter asked me what advice I would give to someone facing HOA harassment. "Document everything," I said. "Every conversation, every email, every violation notice. Take photos, keep records, and know your rights. HOAs have authority, but that authority has limits. If you're being treated unfairly, stand up for yourself. Get other homeowners involved if you can, and don't be afraid to seek legal help if necessary. But most importantly, don't let anyone bully you into giving up your rights, whether it's access to your property, your internet, or anything else." The segment aired on a Friday evening, and by Saturday morning, I had received dozens of emails and messages from homeowners across Arizona and even other states, sharing their own HOA horror stories and asking for advice. I spent much of that weekend responding to messages and directing people to resources that could help them. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Sandra in Tucson who wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to challenge my HOA's unfair enforcement. They've been targeting me for months because I complained about maintenance issues in the community. I've started documenting everything like you did. Thank you for showing me it's possible to fight back." Reading that message made everything worthwhile. The stress, the fines, the confrontations, the time spent documenting and preparing for hearings, all of it had been worth it if it helped even one other person stand up to abuse. By the end of June, Brenda Patterson had begun serving her prison sentence. I heard through the grapevine that she had lost her house due to the restitution payments and legal costs. Her husband had divorced her shortly after her guilty plea. While I felt no joy in her misfortune, I also felt no guilt. She had made choices that led to her downfall, and I had simply refused to be her victim. The summer months passed peacefully in Sonoran Heights. I continued my remote work without interruption, enjoying the fast and private internet connection that I had refused to compromise. The new HOA board implemented quarterly town halls where homeowners could voice concerns and suggestions. Phil, true to his word as a board member, advocated strongly for homeowner rights and transparent governance. In August, I attended a community barbecue at the clubhouse. It was a voluntary social event, something that would have been unthinkable under Brenda's authoritarian leadership. As I stood near the pool with a plate of food, chatting with neighbors I had gotten to know over the past months, I realized how much the community had changed. People were relaxed and friendly. They weren't constantly worried about being cited for minor violations. They actually enjoyed living in Sonoran Heights instead of enduring it. And I had played a role in making that transformation possible, all because I had refused one unreasonable demand and stood my ground when threatened. Linda Chen approached me with a smile. "Derek, I wanted to give you an update. The board officially adopted the Homeowner Bill of Rights last week. Your suggestions were incorporated throughout the document. We're sending copies to every household next week." "That's great," I said. "What are the key provisions?" "Protection from retaliation, mandatory due process before fines can be imposed, a requirement for consistent enforcement of rules, transparency in board decisions, and limits on the amount of fines that can be imposed for minor violations." Basically, everything that Brenda violated in her dealings with you. "Sounds like real reform," I said. It is. And we're also implementing annual financial audits by an independent firm to prevent embezzlement. That was something we should have had all along, but Brenda always blocked it. Now it's mandatory. As the barbecue continued, I found myself talking with homeowners who had their own stories about Brenda's reign. The retired couple whose grandchildren's bikes she had cited as unsightly outdoor storage. The single dad who had received violations because his lawn had brown spots during a summer vacation. The elderly woman who had been fined because her aide's car was parked in her driveway during restricted hours. Everyone had a story, and everyone was relieved that those days were over. September brought cooler weather and a return to routine. I had been living in Sonoran Heights for a year now, and I couldn't believe how much had happened in that time. I had moved in expecting a quiet place to work remotely and had instead become the catalyst for a community transformation. One afternoon, as I was finishing up a work meeting, I received an unexpected call from Patricia Green, the HOA attorney I had consulted months earlier. "Derek, I wanted to follow up with you. Your case with Brenda Patterson has become somewhat famous in HOA legal circles. I've been invited to speak at a conference about HOA reform, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to join me on a panel to share your experience from a homeowner's perspective." I was surprised but intrigued. When and where? It's in Phoenix in October, a gathering of HOA attorneys, property managers, and community leaders. Your story is a perfect example of how homeowners can effectively challenge HOA overreach while still working within the system. I agreed to participate, and in mid-October, I found myself on a stage in front of 200 people, talking about my experience with Brenda and the Sonoran Heights HOA. The audience asked thoughtful questions about documentation strategies, legal resources, and how to organize other homeowners. I shared everything I had learned, hoping it would help people avoid or address similar situations. After the panel, several attorneys approached me to discuss representing homeowners in their own HOA disputes. One mentioned that Arizona was considering new state legislation to strengthen homeowner protections, partly inspired by cases like mine. I was amazed that my simple refusal to share my Wi-Fi password had contributed to a broader conversation about HOA reform. By November, a year and a half after moving to Scottsdale, I felt completely at home in Sonoran Heights. The community had become what an HOA should be, an organization that maintained property values and common areas while respecting homeowners' rights and dignity. The fear and intimidation that had characterized Brenda's leadership were distant memories. I stayed in touch with Phil, who continued to serve on the board and push for homeowner-friendly policies. Linda Chen remained president and proved to be an excellent leader, balancing rule enforcement with common sense and fairness. The community even won an award from the Arizona HOA Association for excellence in governance reform. One December evening, as I was wrapping up work for the day, I looked out my home office window at the desert sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The mountains in the distance stood dark against the colorful sky, and the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. My Wi-Fi router hummed quietly on the shelf, its lights blinking steadily as it delivered the fast, secure internet connection I needed for my work. That simple device, and my decision to protect my access to it, had started a chain of events that changed dozens of lives and reformed an entire community association. I thought about Brenda Patterson, now several months into her prison sentence, and wondered if she understood the irony of her situation. If she had simply accepted my initial refusal and found another solution to her internet problem, she would still be HOA president. Her stubborn insistence on exercising power she didn't have, combined with her pattern of retaliation, had led directly to the investigation that uncovered her embezzlement. In trying to punish me for not sharing my Wi-Fi, she had triggered her own downfall. The story became something I shared cautiously with friends and family outside Arizona, knowing it sounded almost unbelievable. "Wait," they would say. "An HOA president went to prison because you wouldn't give her your Wi-Fi password." And I would explain that it wasn't quite that simple, that the Wi-Fi demand was just the trigger that exposed much deeper corruption. But that, yes, in a way, that's exactly what had happened. As winter settled over Scottsdale and the holidays approached, I reflected on the lessons that would stay with me forever. Power, even small power like HOA authority, could corrupt. Organizations needed checks and balances, transparency and accountability. Individuals had more power to create change than they often realized. And sometimes, standing up for yourself on a seemingly small issue could have ripple effects far beyond what you imagined. I also learned that communities could heal and reform when good people decided to get involved, instead of staying silent. The Sonoran Heights of December was unrecognizable compared to the community I had moved into 18 months earlier. The transformation proved that positive change was possible even in systems that seemed hopelessly broken. The new year arrived, and with it came news that Brenda Patterson would be eligible for early release in a few months due to good behavior and overcrowding in the prison system. Some neighbors expressed concern about her returning to the community, but Linda Chen assured everyone that Brenda had no pathway back to HOA leadership, and that the new oversight systems would prevent any individual from accumulating that kind of power again. I felt no anxiety about her potential return. The community had moved on, stronger and healthier than before. Whatever Brenda did with her life after prison was her concern, not mine. I had protected my rights, exposed wrongdoing, and helped create positive change. That was enough. As I sit here now, 2 years after that initial Monday morning when Brenda demanded my Wi-Fi password, I can look back on the experience with perspective and even a bit of humor. Who would have thought that such an absurd request would lead to such dramatic consequences? But that's how life works sometimes. Small moments of courage, small decisions to stand up for what's right, can cascade into significant change. My internet connection remains fast and secure, available only to me and the devices I authorize. My home in Sonoran Heights is exactly as I want it, with my black doormat, my tall prickly pear cactus, and my visible garden hose. And the HOA, rather than being a source of fear and frustration, actually serves its intended purpose of maintaining our community while respecting our rights as homeowners. I learned that you don't have to be a hero or a revolutionary to make a difference. You just have to be willing to say no when someone demands something unreasonable, document what happens, and stand your ground when pressured. The rest, as they say, is history. A history that started with a simple refusal to share a Wi-Fi password and ended with justice, reform, and a community transformed for the better.